I appreciate the opportunity to be back with you. I don't know how many of you know me from before. I met with you a few years ago. It was in Kansas City. I don't think it was this hotel. But a lot of folks, we're talking about the Packer and Stockyard Act and enforcing antitrust. And at that time, I had kind of come to the conclusion that neither the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Justice was going to enforce antitrust. They'd quit that back in the 80s. So I didn't think I had much to contribute, so I kind of lost contact with you over the years. But I'm glad to see you coming back with a little more radical agenda, because some people call me a radical. They think I sometimes say I'm too radical to be relevant, so it's always good to be about that. But I think that's what we need. I think that's what the family farm action can evolve into that you're talking about here. I think we not only need to enforce the rules, which I have doubts about, but I think we need to change the rules, and we need to change who makes the rules. And the only way we can do that is through political action, through bringing people together, the power of the people, to take control of the government again, and the government take control of the corporations, and end this corporate domination of American and global agriculture. If we're going to do this task, part of what we have to do is confront the corporate propaganda head on. And so the title that I chose for today was How to Feed the World Intelligently Without Corporate Agriculture. How often do you hear American farmers feed the world? That's a myth. It's promoted to make farmers feel good, but it's a front for the real motivation is to convince people that we absolutely have to continue to have this industrial agriculture that's controlled by the large agribusiness corporations, many of them multinational. It's designed to promote what I think increasingly is obvious, that is a failed system of production. But we're still told that the only way that we're going to be able to feed as many people as we're going to have on the globe in 2050 is we have to have this high-tech information technology, biotechnology, to feed this global food and fuel system for the growing population. And American farmers even have told to meet their responsibilities, they're going to have to double production by 2050. It's even in the international arena. Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has something it calls climate smart agriculture, and the whole gist of the climate smart is you have to have genetic engineering and precision agriculture guided by satellite GPS systems that control robotic machines that go across the land and so on. And then you have even organizations in addition to the FAO and the big commodity organizations and the corporations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that are supporting something very similar in terms of a climate smart agriculture. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, all of these folks, in my opinion, are supporting the agenda of the large transnational corporations, and their intention is to dominate and eventually take control of the global food system. And once you control the people's food, you can force them to do about whatever you want them to do, or to let you do whatever you want to do. You all are much more familiar with mergers than I am, but I recently read that with the mergers that are currently in place, 3 large transnational corporations will control 60% of the seed in the world, will control 70% of the agricultural chemicals, and virtually all of the genetically modified organisms which they intend to make the source of all food. We have large land grabs, another phase of land grabbing going on in Africa and South America and Asia. In almost every place they're going, they're taking the land that's been farmed by generations by indigenous farmers in those places. In the news this week, another takeover in the Amazon in Brazil, of people that have farmed the land for decades, and they take ownership and bring in the large corporate industrial agricultural operations to displace those and take control of agriculture. And everywhere industrial agriculture goes, it invariably displaces the small, independent, diverse family farms with large, specialized, mechanized, corporate controlled agricultural systems. See, I understand this myth, but industrial agriculture feeds the world because I bought into it. I spent the first half of my 30-year academic career believing that that was what was absolutely essential and that was what was necessary. I was born and raised on a small dairy farm down in southwest Missouri, and my brother's still on that farm and is still small, and he raised a family there and had a good living there through all the years on that farm where I grew up. That was back in the days when somebody, a poor kid of modest intelligence, could still go to their state universities, which is long past. But I had an opportunity to go to the University of Missouri where I got my bachelor's and master's and eventually my PhD degree. But between my bachelor's and master's, I worked for 3 years with Wilson Packing Company. Now, Wilson was the 4th largest meat packer in the country at that particular time because that was another era within the meat packing business. But when I got out of graduate school at the University of Missouri, I graduated with a degree in agricultural economics. And then I got a job at North Carolina State University where I helped start the hog industry in North Carolina. I'm pretty proud of that. It wasn't the same hog industry then that we have today. We were working with feeder pig cooperatives and things of that nature, trying to help family farmers find an alternative to tobacco, which was under threat at that particular time. I moved from there to Oklahoma State University, worked with the big feedlots out in the panhandle of Oklahoma State as a livestock marketing specialist. I spent the 30-year academic career then, but that was kind of the first half of it. I was a livestock marketing specialist for 15 years at North Carolina State and Oklahoma State. During that time, I was a very traditional agricultural economist. I told farmers that farming was a business. If you expected to survive, you had to farm for the economic bottom line. And if it was a family-operated farm, that you couldn't let the family business get in the way of the farm business, that you had to accommodate the economic bottom line. I told farmers out there that if they expected to have a future in farming, then they needed to be prepared to either get big, and if not so, then they would get out. Because as an economist, we knew that in order to have an efficient agriculture, to be competitive, then you had to have economies of scale, which required large operation. Now, I knew as an economist that that meant when you got big that some farmers would have to get out. But see, I thought that the benefits to society as a whole from having this more efficient kind of agriculture would offset the inconvenience of farmers needing to change occupations, because we as economists consider it just to be an inconvenience when you change from one job to another, and that's what we saw agriculture to be. Well, why was that all that justified? Because we were going to feed the world. We were going to make good food affordable for everyone. We were going to eliminate hunger in this country and around the world. We were going to increase the efficiency of agriculture, bring down production costs. That would bring down the cost of food, and then everybody could afford enough good food for themselves and their families. It was well intended and it was a grand experiment, but it failed. It failed absolutely to do the most important thing it was intended to do, and that was to feed people. In 2015, we see that 13% of the people in this country are classified as food insecure. About 1 out of 8 people food insecure. It means they don't know that they're going to have enough money to get food to get them through the month. About 1 in 6 of our children live in food insecure homes. And about 5% of the people are classified as very low food security, which means they're actually missing meals and they're actually going hungry. We didn't accomplish that. We didn't do away with hunger, but what's even more important, if you go back to 1967, when CBS had the documentary Hunger in America, and we declared hunger a national priority, that we had to address it with the Great Society programs, the estimates were that 5% of the people in this country were hungry. Now, 5% are actually hungry, and even with all the food programs, assistance programs that we have, 1 in 6 of our kids are living in food insecure homes. It was a grand experiment, but 60 years later, we find that that experiment failed. Not only did it fail in this country, but it's failed everywhere around the world where we brought this industrial model of agriculture of the get big, to get out, to specialize, standardize, consolidate. The concerns that drives that system is not about hungry people, it's about dollars. It's about the economic bottom line. If you don't believe it, look at what we produce in this country. We increase production. Dramatically, we increase production, but we're wasting 40% of the food. Why are we doing that? Because those of us that can afford to pay the price for food, we can afford to buy food to waste. So it bid the prices up where the hungry people can't afford to get it. Now we export about 20% of the total production, but that's not feeding the hungry people of the world. Less than half of 1% of our exports go to the 19 hungriest countries in the world today. And whenever people look at this country and we say we're going to feed the world, it makes no sense to them whatsoever. They say, what in the world are you talking about? You're using 40% of your richest land in this country to produce corn to burn in your cars while there are hungry people all around the world starve. You think they take seriously this thing? American farmers are committed to feeding the world? I think not. You know, I didn't wake up to what was fundamentally wrong with what I'd been taught until sometime in the 1980s. 1980s, many of us still refer to it and remember as the farm financial crisis in this country. We'd gone through a period in the 1970s when we were going to feed the world. We were exporting. We were exporting to countries we were making big loans to, and we thought we were going to go on and those markets were going to grow and it was going to be profitable. We experts said it would be profitable until everybody in the world basically was well fed, and that was going to take a long, long time. Even though we were in an inflationary period at that time and high interest rates were high, farming was profitable because of the booming export market, so farmers borrowed to get bigger rather than get out, buy machinery, buy land, or whatever. Then they borrowed a lot of money at record high interest rates, but when we got into the 1980s, the global markets dried up. We went into a domestic recession in the 1980s. It turned into a global recession. Export markets dried up for agricultural commodities. Agricultural commodity prices dropped like a rock, and farmers were caught with huge debts at record high interest rates. They couldn't even pay the interest, let alone the principal. Farm foreclosures and bankruptcy were regular fare on the network news shows in those days. And farm suicides were far from uncommon during those particular times. That's about the time I went from Oklahoma State University to the University of Georgia. I was head of the Extension Agricultural Economics Department. It was the responsibility of people in my department to go out and meet with these farmers. We would ask them to bring in their financial records so we could go over it with them and try to figure out some way that they could work through that financial situation, or maybe get out of farming while they still had some equity, or at least try to talk them out of killing themselves. And that was during the time, it was during that time that I began to realize that the farmers who were in the biggest problems were the farmers who had been doing what we so-called experts had been telling them to do. And we had a lot of those in Georgia at that time because that was during the Carter administration, whenever they borrowed all the money, and FMHA would talk farmers into getting bigger and bigger loans because we wanted to impress the administration in Washington. And we as economists, we understood that some farmers were going to be forced out of business. But what we realized, what we found out in the 1980s, these farmers didn't have better opportunities somewhere else. There weren't jobs somewhere else that they were going to, and many of them didn't want to leave their farm. I couldn't understand at that time why a farmer would commit suicide just because they lost their farm. Then I began to figure it out. On a true family farm, the farm and the family are inseparable. When they lost the farm, it wasn't just a business. They were losing a part of themselves. And some of them couldn't take it. They were inseparable. There was something fundamentally wrong with that kind of agriculture. I didn't get all that education to go out here to drive people off their farms. And then I began to look around. Not only was it bad not working for farmers, but it wasn't working for people in rural communities because those farming communities depended upon families. It doesn't take production to support a community. It takes people to support a community. It takes people not just to buy agricultural supplies in town, but it also takes people to buy clothes and cars and shoes on Main Street of the town. But it's not just economics. It takes people. It takes people to sit in the classrooms, to sit at the desk and keep the country schools open, and And it takes people to serve on the volunteer fire departments and do things of this nature. And it takes people to sit in the church pews. But we were losing all of that. Not only Main Street, but the schools and the houses and the clothes and everything within the rural community was kind of fading away. I began to see what the impact of industrial agriculture was on rural communities, and it's only later that I began to understand what was happening from farming fence row to fence row and tearing out the fence rows and what that was doing then to the land around, the erosion, the pollution with agricultural chemicals and biological waste from the large confinement animal feeding operations. We had created an industrial agriculture that was destroying the productivity of the land and destroying the productivity of people, and that kind of agriculture, I eventually understood quite simply, was not sustainable in any sense. It wasn't sustainable economically, and it's not sustainable economically because everything that's of any use to us as human beings, including everything of economic value, ultimately comes from the earth. It comes from the soil, the air, the water, the energy, the things of the earth. There isn't any place else. And beyond self-sufficiency, it comes to us by way of other people, by way of interacting with other people, trading with them, bartering with them, or whatever. The economy is simply the means by which we're able to meet our needs from other people through impersonal buying and selling rather than gifting or rather than bartering or things of that nature. But if we destroy the productivity of the land, and if you destroy the productivity of the people, you can't sustain the economy. Fortunately, about that time, there was something coming along called sustainable agriculture. And my first understanding of sustainable agriculture was balanced farming. An old program at the University of Missouri in the early days was called balanced farming. But it said, sure, farmers need to make a living, but in order to sustain the farm, the farmer has to take care of the land. It was about the conservation and soil and pollution prevention. And the farmers have to be responsible members of the community, and it has to be a good place for families to live. You have to balance taking care of the land and taking care of the people with making a living on the farm. That made a lot of sense to me. It was about that time I decided my career had to take an abrupt change. I could no longer buy into the system, and I tell you, the system won't tolerate somebody that questions it, whether it's the university system or whatever it is. My academic career as an administrator came to an abrupt halt. All of a sudden, I wasn't on advisory committees, I wasn't on search committees or anything else. But anyway, I was able to go to the University of Missouri with a USDA grant on sustainable agriculture program. The new low-input sustainable agriculture program was just coming on at that time. I was able to get a piece of that and go to the University of Missouri. But sustainable agriculture was then, and it is now, at the very foundation. It's a commitment to meeting the needs of the present, the needs of people of all of the present. And sustainable agriculture is about meeting the basic food needs of everyone at the present, but doing it in such a way that we don't diminish opportunities for the future. We meet the needs of all, but we leave equal or better opportunities for those people of future generations to meet their needs as well. When I first understood that, I said, that is a job big enough for me for the rest of my life, and big enough for a lot of other people in addition to me, but it's very worthwhile. And I could see we weren't even meeting the needs of the present, and I think that's still one of the things I'll come back to later. But how do we expect people who are hungry, people who are without enough good food today, to take seriously taking care of the land, environmental issues for the future when their kids are not even getting enough to eat today? If we're serious about sustainability, then we'll meet the needs, we'll make a commitment to meet the needs of the present, and we'll do it in such a way as creates opportunities for those of the future. I co-coordinated the sustainable agriculture programs at the University of Missouri until I retired in the year 2000, more than 17 years ago. Thankfully, the internet had come along, and I've been able to kind of post papers and do various things on the internet, so I'm still out here doing some of the things I did before, trying to help people understand what's going on in American agriculture, and in my opinion, what we ought to do about it. I guess I'm trying to redeem myself for some of my past sins or something, but I'll just keep on doing it for as long as I'm able to do it. I guess I wasn't totally irrelevant, because in 2014, I got an inquiry from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and asked me if I would be willing to prepare the North American report on family farming for the International Year of the Family Farm. which I eventually accepted that, and that's where I learned a good bit more about global agriculture than I'd ever known up to that standpoint. And Lisa Griffith back here I see was one of my reviewers on that, and we eventually got the report out and got it published, even though it took a long time to deal with something as radical as the report we developed. But anyway, I learned from that the major promoters of industrial agriculture around the world are basically the US, Canada, and Australia, along with the big agribusiness corporations out here. Europe's kind of ambivalent about one way or the other, but much of the rest of the world doesn't want corporate agriculture and doesn't really need corporate agriculture. I learned through that period of time. Now you have the big foundations. This is the Gates Foundation, Ford Foundations are out here pushing this agenda, knowingly or unknowingly. They're supporting the corporate interests in kind of the takeover. Now on the other side of that, you also have a major international movement kind of supporting agroecology as an alternative into industrial agriculture, and that's headed up by something called the Viva Campesina movement that started back in the early 90s, and originally when the founding things put together, they were more than, I can't recall for sure, but between 80 and 90 different countries involved into that. But these are what they call kind of the peasant farmers, or the farmers that are trying to maintain control of their land. We would call them subsistence farmers, but they call themselves their family farmers. And peasant farming to them is not a degrading term, it's a proud term. And so that whole movement is out there pushing toward food sovereignty, and I think it's an important movement. I think we need to take it seriously here. In their statement, they say that people have a basic fundamental right to food. Food is a basic right to enough culturally appropriate food to meet their basic needs, and it must be produced in an ecologically sound, sustainable way. And that people have a right to determine their own food system. And the whole food sovereignty movement was a direct rejection of corporate takeover of international agriculture. But that's what's on the other side. And those are mainly the people out here that are still fighting to hold on to it. And there's been people that are on the side of these folks. There was an important report in 2009. Mary Hendrickson was involved in this one. It came out, Agriculture as a Crossroad. Involved over 400 scientists from 58 nations. And they talked about, their conclusion was, they said, you know, agriculture is multifunctional. It's not just an economic business enterprise, it's multifunctional. Agriculture produces food and fuel, sure enough, but agriculture also has important environmental functions. It catches, sequesters the water. It sequesters and releases CO2. It has to do with ecological and biological diversity for the integrity of the natural ecosystem. There's also a social function, provides employment, but it enhances the quality of life. It passes culture from one generation to another. And yes, it is an agricultural function that provides the economic foundation for many rural economies and many rural communities. Agriculture is inherently multifunctional. What's important is whether or not those functions create positive or negative impacts as far as society, economics, and the environment are concerned. It's a question about the ecological, economic, social functions. Are they positive? Are they negative? And 60 years of experience with industrial agriculture, corporately promoted, corporately controlled industrial agriculture proves that when you focus on the single economic bottom line, the ecological and social consequences are inherently negative. And that's what we've seen. And there's tons of evidence out here to support that. I would call that a monofunctionally managed, multifunctional farming operation. What we have to do is manage multifunctionally. And that's what family farms traditionally were. That's what balanced farming was. It wasn't just about making money. Money was the means by which you could make a living for yourself and your family on doing what you wanted to do with your life so you could take care of the land and be a responsible member of the community. It was multifunctional. That's what it was. It was balanced farming, and that's what we're looking for. And that was kind of the essence of my report to the United Nations, was that we have to go to the basic values that supported family farms, multifunctional family farms that weren't just businesses. They were ways of life, to be a member of the community, to be a steward of nature. There's a more recent report, 2016, the International Panel on Experts on Sustainability, a report called Uniformity to Diversity. It was 25 different people, scientists from around the world that were involved in that. They cited over 350 different studies. in arriving at their conclusions, and I'm going to read their conclusions. I think this is one of the more important parts of this century so far. They say today's food and farming systems have succeeded in supplying large volumes of food to global markets, but are generating negative outcomes on multiple fronts: widespread degradation of land, water, and ecosystems, high greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity losses, persistent hunger, and micronutrient deficiencies, alongside with rising obesity and diet-related diseases and livelihood stresses for farmers around the world. That's their indictment of industrial agriculture, based on studies that have been done over the past 60 years with over 350 citations. They call the evidence overwhelming, indicting industrial agriculture. They mentioned obesity. They mentioned the problems of diet-related diseases. 2016, 500 scientists from 50 different countries come together to assess the hunger and food security issue, and they came to the conclusion that obesity and the related diseases are now a larger threat around the globe than is actual hunger. And everywhere the industrial food system goes with its Western diet, you see the same problems emerging. In the United States, for example, even though the people, particularly low-income people that can afford enough calories to give to their children and to themselves, they end up with a whole range of diet-related diseases, not just obesity, but related diseases of high blood pressure and heart disease and diabetes and various cancers. It's rampant. When we cut the percentage of our income on average spent on food in half, we more than doubled what we spent on health care, and a big part of that is diet-related. What the IPS report we called for, they said we have to have a fundamentally different model of agriculture. We have to have a model that supports diversity and multifunctionality. And I'll read again from the report. They said, what is required is a fundamentally different model of food systems based on diversified farms and landscape, replacing chemical inputs by organizing biodiversity and stimulating interaction between different species as part of a holistic strategy to build long-term soil fertility and healthy agrosystems and secure livelihoods. They go on to say the data shows that these systems can compete with industrial agriculture in terms of total output, performing particularly strong under environmental stress and delivering production increases in places where additional food is desperately needed. Diversified agroecology systems can pave the way to diverse diets and improved health. That was their conclusions, based on reports over the past 60 years. You know, contrary to popular belief, industrial agriculture isn't feeding the world today. It isn't feeding hungry people, but it isn't feeding people in general. Various UN reports have come out indicating that small family farms, what we would call subsistence farms in general, are feeding 70 to 80% of the people in the world today. And that with systems that are not industrial systems, such as permaculture and biodynamic farming, nature farming in the East, holistic management on livestock operations, that these operations, and the research has shown, can double, triple, some cases quadruple production on those small independent family farms without industrialization, without the corporations, without all of the input. If you take 70% and you double the production, that's 140% of total production right there. They don't need industrial agriculture. They don't want industrial agriculture. They don't want corporations coming in and taking control of their land and driving them off of their farms and into the fringes of the city where there's no jobs for them and where their families will be hungry, if not starved. Because somebody somewhere decided we had to industrialize their agricultural system because they were starving. You know, in the U.S., our challenge here is not increasing production. We can quit wasting food if we want more. We could quit burning food in our car if we wanted more. But our challenge here isn't more production. Our challenge here is sustainability. And there's a whole movement out here that's moving in that direction. And some folks here are involved in that, and they call themselves organic or ecological, regenerative farming, holistic management, biological farming, or just traditional family farms. They're supporting the local food system, which is the fastest part now. And they started the organic movement. They still account for less than 10% of the total food production in this country, but their numbers are growing, and it's the most dynamic, fastest changing part of the overall food system. And eventually, these folks are creating the replacement for the industrial food system. Now, how long it takes them to replace it, and whether the industrial food system has to collapse or not before we actually get into a situation where we say, well, what in the world will we do? And then the organic, biological farmers, the equal farmers, the holistic people come in and say, do what we've been doing. Before we reach that, or if we have to go to that point, depends on whether or not we as people will support public policies that further that whole movement toward the kind of the sustainability, a sustainable food system, or whether we allow the corporations to continue to promote the industrial food system. The defenders of the status quo, the industrial status quo, the corporate defenders are tremendously powerful. They are economically powerful, as we've heard, with the consolidation into the large operations. And with that economic power comes political power, and they basically control the whole process. You know, people ask me what we ought to do about farm policies in USDA, and I say, well, let's just close down USDA and start over. And that's basically what I think we ought to do. Not be quite so radical. Do away with all commodity programs. Every commodity program supports the production of a single commodity, which is specialization, which is standardization, which is industrialization. But we need to make powerful changes, and they know that. They're threatened. They're threatened by something as small as the organic movement or the local food movement, because they know that's challenging the system. And you know, the only power strong enough to dethrone the corporations is the power of the people. We're still strong enough. We still have the power in this system to take control of our government and control the corporation. And a big part of that is what you folks are involved in. We have to restore competition. Without competition in the markets, you don't serve even the collective interest of the people, the collective economic interest. That's all the economy can do. To serve the common interest, you have to work together through government to make sure that the economy doesn't extract and exploit nature and society. But without the collective interest of the people who are served by competitive markets. And the government then has to have a role in both of those. We have to make government work again. You know, the basic laws of markets haven't changed since I was in graduate school at the University of Missouri. And if you want to have competitive markets, if Adam Smith's invisible hand is going to work, you have to have certain conditions in place. You have to have a large number of small farms, so many that no one individual action of any single firm has an appreciable impact on prices or conditions of trade. It has to be easy to get in and out of business, because people that aren't able to produce things that consumers need have to be able to get out, but people that have a better idea have to be able to get in, which means that it can't be so, barriers can't be so high in terms of capital or patents or things of that nature. You have to have accurate information. You have to be able to make a decision and anticipate in advance what the value you're going to receive out of that product over a period of time. And you have to have consumer sovereignty, which means you have to be free to choose without coercion and without persuasion and all of this sort. We have none of those things today. Any economist should be able to look at our markets today and say they're not even approaching what we have to have for competitive markets. And it all has to start with breaking up the large corporations and reestablishing a large number of small farms. We learned in market organization. When I was in graduate school, we learned about structure, conduct, and performance. That's what antitrust was all about. Structure was a large number of small farms. Conduct was so the large farms, small farms wouldn't collude to act like a big farm or a big operation. Structure, conduct, and performance. Then performance, this is where the problem comes in, because economists said, well, what's really important is performance. But the problem is the old neoclassical model of static economics is that if you have a monopoly, what it's going to do is reduce production and increase prices. So the economists come around and say, well, we look at the market today, we've got firms like Walmart and various other things. Well, they're increasing output all the time and they're cutting prices, so we must have good performance. So let's still pay any attention to structure and conduct because the markets are performing. What they fail to understand is that when you have a firm that's trying to gain market share, it behaves in a dynamic way of trying to drive its competitors out of business and all kinds of new products so that patents doesn't run out, things like this. It behaves as if it was an old static monopoly when it really is in the process of gaining control of the market so it can do whatever it wants to do. But we have to challenge those things because that's where we're moving today. What we have today is by focusing on economies of scale in the operation, we have an economy that produces all kinds of cheap stuff, but we have no assurance that it's producing the right stuff. I would say even in the automobile industry, which has done, improved quality and things, we have no way of knowing that we could not have had even better cars quicker that were more efficient and safer if we had had a competitive automobile market. And you can go from there all the way down. The only way that markets behave in the way that economists assume they are is if you have true economic competition. Now, in order to bring about that competition, we've got to go back, and it's going to take some powerful changes. We have the systems emerging here. We have the emergence of a system that can take control of government, but we've got to recognize that we can't use the old industrial thinking to retake control of what we have. That what we're dealing with is living systems. A society is a living system. Natural ecosystems are living systems. And living systems are inherently diverse. They're dispersed. They're independent in terms of different decisions, and we can't specialize, standardize control of movement from the top and expect that to function in a way that's good for society as a whole in terms of the living system. What we have to have is a diverse group of people consistent with the values of their places, their ecosystems, that are tied together by a common cause and a common principle rather than a common leader. I think the Organization of Competitive Markets and your new Family Farm Action Group could be a leader in this whole thing. And I think there's natural allies out here that you need to bring into the whole operation. Those of us that are out here fighting the CAFOs or concentrated animal feeding operations, we're fighting corporations. We're not going to win that war until we dethrone the corporations. Those that are fighting GMOs, those that are fighting for the humane treatment of animals, those that are dealing with the impact of agriculture on global climate change, all of those are issues that are being driven by the large agribusiness corporations out here, and all have a common interest in dethroning the corporate power. Those that are working on hunger issues, the natural allies, those that are working on workers' rights and social equity issues, all of that ties back in. Those that are working on public health and the antibiotic resistance is coming out of the large livestock operations, but air pollution, water pollution, degradation of our food, all of those tie back into the corporate thing. The food sovereignty movement are natural allies. We have people here like the Family Farm Defenders and the National Family Farm Coalition that are supporting those. The Canadian Farmers Union supporting. The broader movement of the Move to Amend that are trying to take away corporate power and take away their ability to influence elections through spending and things of that nature. Those that are fighting climate change in general. All of those are natural allies because none of those are going to succeed ultimately as long as the corporations are making the rules in Washington. We got a lot of like-minded people out there. And I'm involved with these people, and we're fighting battles that we know we're going to lose many of those battles, and even if we win them, it's not going to change things. But we're doing it simply because we know it's the right thing to do. We need to turn that right thing to do into where every one of those skirmishes contributes to the moving toward of gaining political power, of gaining economic power, of gaining the power of the people, of awakening the people to what's going on and bringing the people together toward a common cause and let them see that the large corporations that claim to be their friends are their enemies, and we need to dethrone the corporate king. But regardless of what strategy you or I or others may choose, I would argue it's simply not very intelligent to continue doing the same thing we've been doing for the past 60 years and expecting somehow that the result will be different. If we're going to feed the world intelligently, we will do it without and in spite of corporate agriculture. Thank you. I don't know if we have time for question or comment. I usually take time to say, well, that's my truth, and if yours is different, that's okay. But I thought I'd try to leave time if somebody has a comment or question, or if you want to move on and kind of make up time, that's fine with me. What do you want to do, Joe?
We take a couple questions, Dr.
Okay. Anybody have a question, comment?
Could you repeat the name of that report that you were talking about a lot? I guess.
From uniformity to diversity. Uniformity to diversity. Now, I prepared a paper, and I gave it to, I can't remember who I sent it to. I sent an email to somebody. And it's supposed to be up on the website and make it available. But it'll have a link to the report. It also has a link to Agricultural Crossroads, which was the 2008 report, which was very important. But I thought the 2016 Uniformity and Diversity, I just think was a very powerful report because they put it so concisely. That's the reason I read it. I wanted to make sure that you knew that I wasn't making up what they said, that they actually wrote those things.
One other question, Dr.
Okay.
John, I don't have a question, I just have a remark.
Go ahead.
We've both been at this game a while,
Right.
and this is not the first time we've been together and so forth. That's probably the best inspirational speech I've heard over the last 20 years that I've been involved.
I think we all agree.
Well, maybe it's just because it hits your biases. I always like knowledge that my biases as well. You know?
Let's